PJNet Live on Monday night, January the 27th. We have a bumper rolling, we have a Santa Monica background, and we have Julie Bonn standing by in our green room. We will switch to Studio 6 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to a brand new week here on PJNet Live, soon to become PJNet.tv. I'm starting to say it now. Yes, tomorrow I'll be working on the PJNet.tv website, which presently consists of our new logo. We'll improve that. Folks, it is so good to start the week out. I see the chat room. Well, let me get it over here where I can watch it left-handed. Okay. Good to see Ben and Hazards 4, JD, Rachel, Sunbelt Girl, and Old Data Genesis is here. Folks, you are in for, well, some fireworks, I hope. I don't know that any of the people that typically watch this program are struggling with a domestic abuse. I'm pretty sure we're not, because I know most of you. But I think we all know of someone who is. And as luck would have it, as Providence would have it, well, for lack of a better word, an expert on the subject, I ran across on Twitter just last night. And her name is Julie Bonn Blank, and she is on the West Coast, thus the Santa Monica background. Julie, thanks for joining us, especially on such short notice. I was trying to do as much recon as I could, trying to figure out what you do, and I got more intrigued with why you're doing it than what you're doing. But let's briefly, you have a ministry that helps people who are victims of what used to be always called domestic violence. You always call it domestic abuse. Why?
So there's a difference between domestic abuse and violence, and that is because in general, our legal system, statewide, countywide, citywide, nationwide, only recognizes domestic violence as a physical assault. But there's actually 7 types of domestic abuse, and those include psychological and emotional and spiritual and financial as well. All of those categories are counted as abuse. So although one cannot get a restraining order unless there is physical abuse involved, we as agencies do teach and train on the other types of abuse because they're so prevalent. And in addition, emotional abuse is very damaging, and it can be more damaging even than physical abuse. And so a lot of the people we work with, it's never gotten physical, but it is emotional and spiritual and psychological and maybe even sexual. They've just never been thrown against the wall. But it is still abuse nonetheless, and abuse kills no matter the type.
You mentioned that there are 7. We have 20 minutes. Could you in 1 minute touch on each 7 and give a specific example of that type of abuse?
Absolutely. So all forms include psychological abuse, but psychological abuse can include things like mind games, mental coercion, multiple calling and texting somebody to track where they're at. Physical is hitting, shoving, any of that, choking, posturing to intimidate. Sexual is there as well. There's pornography is a sexual abuse. Put downs and jokes that are sexual in nature are sexual abuse. Affairs are sexual abuse. Property abuse, punching walls or doors, destroying things, slamming doors, use of weapons, even hiding things. Animal abuse can include getting an animal that somebody is allergic to, or having an animal and paying more attention to that animal than to your spouse, or your partner. Spiritual is quite common, the misusing of scriptures with those verses like, submission and headship, and those verses that are misused in order for somebody to control what another person is thinking or feeling or doing. Then there's financial. Financial means you have $50 to go to the grocery store and that's it. And I want to see your receipt when you get home. And I want you to account for every item. Financial can also be making you control the finances instead of him or her. Not paying child support or spousal support is financial abuse. And then there's verbal, and that is name calling, put down, swearing, threats, all that, discounting, criticizing, blaming, and even the silent treatment is actually verbal abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's always very effective in remedying the basic problem. Julie, I don't question the validity of each of those categories and the examples that you gave. I really don't. And I know that you care, and so do I. But here's my question. I
Okay.
think all of us are guilty of at least one or more of those, aren't we?
Absolutely.
All right,
Yes.
so are we all abusers?
No, we
All
all
right.
do show controlling behaviors, but abuse is a pattern of that. So it's
Okay.
not normal conflict, it's not normal argument, it's a pattern of somebody using those tactics to control another person. So that's what's important to remember. Yeah, we all might slam a door once in a while, or we all might call somebody a name or whatever, and yes, we should, make amends for that. But unless it's a pattern of it, then it's not considered abusive.
Okay, so there's conflict and there's abuse, and there's this kind of gray line in there. How do you decide? I mean, when people come to you, uh, you have to assess, has that line been crossed? How do you do that?
Absolutely. A lot of it is based on how they are feeling and how they are doing. And do they feel threatened? Do they feel afraid? Is this happening? Am I hearing key points like, if this doesn't change, I'm going to hurt myself, hurt someone else. If this doesn't change, my kids are having nightmares. It's affecting the family. There's key things that we look out for to see, how it is affecting. And it's a pattern. So if I have a woman tell me, well, we were in an argument last week and he gave me the silent treatment for 3 days because he didn't like what I was saying. And then I'm going to say, oh, how often does that happen? And she's going to say, oh, she will likely say, oh, that happens at least once a month or whatever the case might be. And so we do kind of lead it out. Now, even if, it has only happened once, usually there's other instances of controlling behavior too. Normally there's not just one. Very rarely do I ever see one. So sometimes you can get into it a little bit more by asking different types of questions to see if there's any other type of abuse that's involved.
I know this is a little elementary, but clearly, when things reach a physical stage where somebody's being hit or hurt physically, that line's very clear. But it kind of reminds me of suicide. After the fact, we all look backwards in perfect hindsight and see those signs that were there. What are some of the signs?
Well, physical abuse, often things work up to that.
Right.
So that's something to understand when you work in the industry. Rarely do people, as an example, walk down the aisle and then somebody smacks them that night. It
Mm-hmm.
usually starts with controlling behaviors and maybe some psychological and emotional abuse, and it works its way up, to a physical alteration. But that is not always present. So it's important to keep an eye on the signs. It's important to keep an eye on what people are feeling and thinking, and doing as they're in a relationship. We talk to a lot of pastors and counselors and teachers that are teaching like marriage classes because I want them to recognize that some of what might be coming in their door is not normal marriage conflict. It is abusive, and it should not be treated with counseling, and it should not be treated by a marriage class. It needs to be separated out so that she does not pay consequences later on, assuming if it's the man that's the abuser. And it's very important for that component.
Yeah, it seems to me in a marriage, for example, when they're dating, the gentleman doesn't present himself as an abuser.
Right.
What are some telltale signs in the dating relationship that might be a hint that they could be an abuser?
Yeah, we see in those relationships a lot of jealousy. We
Hmm.
see a quickly moving relationship. That was the case with my marriage. It was very quickly moving, my first marriage. We see a lot of people saying, well, it was kind of a red flag, but there's so many other good things that I wanted to be cautious about. So, as an example, I know a gal that, basically when she came home from her wedding, she was interested in going out with her bridesmaids who were still in town. And the bridesmaids and her husband, said, you're choosing them over me. And how could you do this? And she felt really bad. And she's like, oh, wait a minute. I just, they're still in town. I just want to do lunch. And he was like, no, don't choose them over me. And so she didn't. But that was the start of seeing, okay, he's trying to control something in that relationship. Another thing we see is isolation very early in the relationship. We see if a guy tends to abuse or chooses to abuse, we see him trying to isolate his person. So he'll say things like, your parents are just something else. What is wrong with them? We need to not spend time with them anymore. Or maybe
Uh,
your mom influences you in a bad way. Or, you know what, your sister really isn't that good for you. You shouldn't be spending so much time with her, or whatever the case might be. We see those isolation happening, as well as sometimes him moving her around, moving her from church to church, all to prevent her from being close to other people so that he can control that relationship.
right.
So those are some things you see. You can also see cheating sometimes, early on, affairs and things like that as well.
Yeah, I can see the isolation thing. The perpetrator is trying to cut the ties, the network of support, so that
Right.
that person is solely dependent upon them
Right.
for their well being, and that's how you control people. Interesting. Now, you mentioned something that I've never heard before, that pornography is a form of abuse. Now, if you asked 100 women out there, uh, do they agree or disagree with that statement? Of those 100, how many do you think would agree with you?
I think that society has conditioned us to think otherwise. So I don't think the percentage is as high as I would like to see. But I think it's become more and more evident that not only is it abusive in a marriage, but it's also abusive to the people that are on film. There's many cases of people on film that are not there willingly, that are coerced,
Hmm.
that are drugged. It's same with prostitutes on the street. The majority of them are not wanting to be a prostitute. They're there keeping their pimp happy, and because they're addicted at this point in time, and that's been a tactic to pull that in. And it's the same in the porn industry, if not worse. I know a few ladies who came from the porn industry and now are in recovery, and that's their stories are just awful. Things like being handed prescription pills with that are narcotics when they couldn't handle a scene, or things that they don't even remember happening to them. And so not only is it an abuse, it's emotional and sexual abuse within a relationship when somebody is not wanting to partake in that, and it's upsetting to them and their partner does it anyway. But it is the industry itself is on the background, in the filming of it as well.
Well, I guess if the goal of the culture is to be more egalitarian between male and female, we've probably moved in that direction, because what I was leading up to is, how do you think men, to what extent would they agree with you that consuming pornography is spouse abuse?
I would say the majority would not agree that it is spouse abuse to view pornography. And I believe the reason I would feel that is because they want to continue it. And if there's a problem with it, they're going to have to deal with it versus it not being a problem and an accepted part of society. But, you look at how our boys are raised. Here's an example. They're out on the playground, and what do they hear if they don't run fast enough? They hear, oh, you're a sissy, or
Hmm.
something of the like that has a feminine trait. They are raised just because society expects it and thinks that everybody does it does not make it a right action. Just because we've got used to it does not make it a right action. It is still wrong. And pornography can lead to a bunch of other things as well. There's more and more research out there showing what it leads to and the degradation of the society. I would encourage anybody to look up that side of it. And if a guy is saying, look, it's normal and every guy views pornography and it's not abusive, then he needs some help with that to save his marriage and his family.
When women come, I'm going to put your website up here, because you have a number that victims can call, and that number can be found on the website abuserecovery.org. I'm going to leave it there for a little while, even though it kind of kind of gets in the way a little bit. What When you go to that website, if you're a victim of abuse, what are you going to find that's going to offer you not only help but hope?
Well, there is a couple videos on the homepage with victim stories, and these are not women that just have a story of abuse and issues. They are women that have healed from their abuse and taken that step forward. We have a blog that has also a lot of stories on it in that regard. There is a resources section. There is a tab that says, "Am I being abused?" Because one of the most common calls we used to get, not so much now because they go to the website, is this abuse? They'll call and say, so and so does this to me. Is this abusive? And that's a document that really outlines the danger signs of it, and things to be cautious of. We have like checklists. Some people request a checklist for like group meetings or youth meetings. for dating violence or whatever, that the kids can actually check and say, yes, this happens in my relationship. No, this does not, and score at the bottom. So there's a lot of resources there. We're also we have a very large following on Facebook, mostly survivors and victims, but also other people in the ministry and whatnot that really, love the page and are helped out through that page as well as Instagram and Twitter as well. So lots of resources on the site. We don't want you to log in if it's not safe for you to do so. If you are still living with your abuser and this abuser has access to your computer, I would prefer you just pick up the phone and give me a call versus going to the website. And certainly don't download any of the articles there. But there is a lot of help there available, and also for churches and for clergy to see if they are ready to tackle abuse in the congregations. Because the reality is that our stats are exactly the same as anybody else. So if you have 10 people sitting on a pew at your church, 3 of them have experienced abuse. That is no different in the Christian, unfortunately, in the faith-filled, places than it is in the secular.
As is the case with suicide, alcoholism, divorce, and every other malady out there, it seems that we proclaim we have the answers, yet the statistics bear evidence otherwise. Why do your center even exist? I mean, couldn't people just go to their minister, their pastor, or something like that? Why did you even have to be there?
I would love to work myself out of a job. That would be absolutely wonderful. All of us that way feel here. But unfortunately, about 50% of the survivors that we work with have been to their church. They have been to their pastor or a leader within the church, and they have received a secondary abuse from that person not knowing how to respond due to lack of education or spewing out Bible verses that were not meant to be, how they spew them. I believe I just read the book We Too, and it's by Mary DeMouth, and she's really good at spelling it all out. She believes the reason that the churches are dropping in attendance numbers because women are not being listened to when they go to their churches. So many of the women that we work with have left the church entirely, have not found another church. And it is because the church was more interested in saving the institution of marriage than the people within. So we have to be very, very careful of that in our responses. So that's one of the things we do at ARMS is we do training for churches and pastors and leaders and staff so that when somebody comes to them, they can absolutely have the right response. And it can help this woman through or this man through this walk versus, turning them away from the church and not believing them.
Well, and I guess I don't know if we should go there. We only got 2 minutes. But typically, in my part of the world, churches are going to be pastored by men. Typically, in my part of the world, victims of abuse are female. Is there a need for more females in ministry in this area?
My opinion as a female would be absolutely. My husband's opinion as a male would be absolutely. He tells me that frequently, and especially in the area of caregiving. So, a lot of the churches that we have here will have a female woman as a pastor or a non-pastor, but who actually oversees the care and the recovery ministries of the church. Some are like director of wholeness because that's a specialty to them, that we women have that ability to be nurturing. And so, partnered with those skills of being a pastor and a nurturer and a potential counselor, that can be very effective. Yes, I do believe there needs to be more women in leadership in churches. Absolutely.
We're down to a minute. There's got to be a lot of highs and a lot of lows. What's one of the highs in your ministry that you can recall?
The high is seeing the change. We have programs for victims, but we also have programs that they call batterers intervention. And we have those for men and for women, for people who have chosen to abuse. And we have had cases. I had one recently where I have a gal in one of my groups. Her husband signed up for our men's program, which is called Mankind. And he has made great strides. They had to separate for a while, but they are back together now. And he truly has seen that what he's done and the impact, and he's taken responsibility for it. And he's been, sorry. He has, the true definition of repentance is to turn around and go the opposite direction. And he did that. And they are now putting their marriage back together, and they are strong, and they still have things to work through, and he still stays accountable for his things. And so that does happen. There are men and women that make a change and are able to save their marriage. And especially the effect on the children. I mean, that is huge. You know, children who grow up in abuse are, you know, much more likely to either become abusers or to become a victim of abuse. And even if they're not targeted within the home, they are absorbing it. And that is often the route that they choose. So I tell everybody that I meet, I say, someday I want you to be able to look at a Thanksgiving table of 25 descendants and say, I broke that cycle of abuse in this family. Instead of seeing it in your kids and in your grandkids and in your great grandkids, I broke that cycle. And that is available for people that actually want to change and make a difference.
We're out of time. I'm going to go one more minute. Julie, this is personal, right?
All right.
To you. You have a story.
I do have a story. I have a few stories, actually.
I'll give you 1 minute.
I've had a series of abusive relationships in my life. I look back and I see controlling behaviors in at least two of my boyfriends. I then got married to someone who didn't start out that way and who I loved very much, but was also very addicted. He was addicted to opiate medications. And we had some very controlling issues in that marriage of him attempting to control. And eventually we did get divorced. We did have to get divorced because he decided not to change. And then he passed away 6 years ago. So it was a tough story. You know, my kids and I have suffered the consequences, you know, of that, and suffered the consequences of me not making changes for those 17 years. Hindsight is 2020. And now I'm very fortunate to have had a second chance. I'm remarried to Bill, my husband now, and he's amazing. He treasures me. He treats me like gold, you know, like I am a daughter of the Most High King, and I am, and I deserve that. So I'm very fortunate to have had that healing and that second chance, and now to work, you know, in this industry to make an impact. But not all women get that. So I know that God has blessed me in that, and I'm grateful for that. But I wish that for all the women that I work with, for sure.
And what blesses me, Julie, is that you're paying it forward. And we're out of time. Julie, thank you for sharing. Well, there's so much, folks. I'm going to put the website up there one last time, and you can probably find a number there. Oops, boy, I really messed that up. Okay. Julie's gone, but abuserecovery.org is not. That is their website, and I hope that you will go check out all that is there, even if you're not in an abusive relationship. Be prepared, folks. We are at war. And we are also out of time. We have Casper's Take coming up in just a few moments. But before I leave you, got to ask you two things. What is the boldest thing you've ever done for Christ? And by the way, when exactly was that? Never be satisfied with either answer. Welcome to kind of hang out. Casper will be here.